Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. In this episode, we feature Dr. Nick Wignall. Nick is a friend of mine that I met recently who is a clinical psychologist and mindset coach out of Portland, Oregon. Nick's background is in helping anxious high achievers become more healthier versions of themselves and help them figure out how it is that they can manage some of the anxiety that can get in the way of our success. This conversation, I think, has tremendous relevance to everyone who negotiates, because one of the most important negotiations that you will have to manage is the negotiation with yourself. And Nick provides us with some incredible tools that are easy to use, but tools that can be powerful to us in terms of managing that negotiation with ourselves. Primarily, how is it that we deal with our emotions? How is it that we deal with the fears and the anxieties that can come with negotiating high-stakes deals and solving really significant problems? So let's jump into this conversation with Dr. Nick Wignall and think about how it is that we can negotiate effectively with the person who's most important, and that is each of us.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad to be here, John. I love this topic. I'm excited to talk more about it. And yeah, let's dive in.
Good deal. Well, hey, let's kick off. Just give people a sense of your background, and let's start there, and then we'll jump into our conversation.
Sure. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training, spent 6 years in graduate school, worked as a therapist for about 6 years, working primarily with folks who had anxiety and insomnia. Sleep issues and anxiety issues were my bread and butter. So spent, really cut my teeth doing that, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, working with individuals. And then almost out of the blue, I ended up doing a little bit of consulting for a guy who had a couple companies, and what he wanted is help with his leadership team. They were having some conflict, communication difficulties, and he wanted me to come in and kind of assess the situation and recommend some changes. So I started working with that team, and it had a lot of what I was seeing were the underlying anxiety dynamics that I had been seeing in my work with individuals and that were coming out in his team and causing a lot of friction and tension with their kind of communication and functioning together. So I worked with them, and then he was like, "This is great. We should go do this with other companies." So long story short, I left my clinical practice, and now I run a consulting firm he's my business partner, and we work with executive teams to kind of create more cohesive and sort of effective team functioning, mostly by helping folks kind of turn inward and learn how to recognize these unhelpful emotional dynamics and change their relationship with them so that they can function at their very highest level. So I kind of jump ship from the clinical world to the corporate world, doing a lot of work with leaders. And I have a small coaching practice where I work now with individuals on what I call mindset coaching. So looking at if anxiety is really present in their life and getting in the way, how can we create a healthier relationship with our anxiety so that it's not so much of an obstacle in terms of, what we want to achieve and accomplish.
That's fantastic. So let's jump in and let's talk about those emotional dynamics that you just referenced. I define negotiation as a strategic communication process to get a deal or to solve a problem. And when you think about that in terms of having to communicate, there's anxiety that comes with that. When you think about putting a deal together, lots of anxiety that gets triggered in terms of trying to put the next deal together or looking for the next deal or trying to make it happen in the way that you want it to happen so that it's going to be positive for your company. And then obviously problems bring anxiety as well, whether they're business problems or people problems or leadership problems, whatever the case might be, there's a lot of anxiety around that. And so as we start thinking about anxiety, we start that conversation with really thinking about emotion management. And you've described it in some of your writing and in some of your speaking that, emotion management is one of the most important skills in life. And so tell us why, as negotiators, it's critical that we are skillful in how we manage our emotions.
Yeah, well, I would say a fun way to look at this question is to invert it and say, when I'm having the biggest problems in my life, could be personal life, could be professional life, when I make the biggest mistakes or the worst decisions, what was the what was the core ingredient that led to that bad decision? Mm-hmm. And I would say almost always a key, if not the key element, is a big, difficult emotion came up, often some version of fear or anxiety. Mm. And because a lot of us aren't trained well to notice, much less deal with emotions well. We're trained how to deal with numbers and how to communicate and all sorts of things, but very few of us are trained in the art of dealing with difficult emotions. What we end up doing is either running away or just getting in a fight with our emotions and trying to get rid of them. We'll talk more about that, but both of those two strategies actually backfire. And so again, I think learning how to deal with these emotions that inevitably come up, and that's key, I think, is that a lot of us assume that if I'm anxious, if I'm angry, if I'm upset in any way, something's wrong. And then we go into like battle mode and we try to now we're focused on the emotion instead of what we actually want to achieve, which of course gets in the way of us making progress. So the first mindset thing is to realize that just because you're getting anxious going into a negotiation or having a difficult conversation with your spouse or whatever it is, that's not bad. It's completely normal. In fact, it's a sign. I tell my clients all the time, the fact that you're anxious and stressed to some degree is a sign that you're ambitious, that you're working towards difficult, meaningful challenges in your life. And that's good and normal. Now, you probably have an excess anxiety because you're not managing that anxiety well. And we'll talk about how to do that. But the first thing is to remind yourself and realize it's not necessarily bad that I'm feeling anxious. I just need to get more skilled in terms of how I deal with it.
Yeah, I love that. And, it's really interesting because some of the conversations that I have with folks that I'm coaching from a negotiation standpoint is they will start to describe what you just outlined in terms of, well, I'm really concerned about this, or I'm really, scared that we might find ourselves in this situation. And, they're doing it in the context of the negotiation, but they're describing the fear that you talked about. That is kind of an emotional trigger for them. And, one of the things that I work to try to do is to say, someone has to take on this emotional responsibility of putting this deal together. Mm-hmm. And that's part of your role, is you're willing to take that on. And sometimes they need folks like me to take it on for them because they're not going to be able to manage it in such a way that they make good decisions because, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think what happens is when these emotions swell up, they take over. And so people are quickly trying to figure out, how do I get back to my place of normalcy? How do I get back to my place of comfort? And to do so, I've got to do something with this emotion. And the reality is that in the context of negotiation, people will make huge concessions in order to get their emotional state back to a place that is comfortable for them. And that I would describe as your flight. That's your easy way out. That's the off-ramp. But the problem is it's really costly.
Yes, I love that. And it transitions really well to one of the first things I always tell people when they're in these high-stakes situations and they're struggling, not doing real well with anxiety, is there's basically two mistakes that we make in how we react to anxiety. The first is what you're describing, which is, if you think about the fight or flight response, we all have this innate inborn response to any kind of fear, right? Which is our tendency, our instinct is to either flee and run away, do whatever we can to get rid of this thing as quickly as possible, or fight. How do I attack it and crush it and fix it so that it's no longer there? Now, what's interesting is if you apply either of these strategies to anxiety, it actually makes anxiety worse. And this is an especially difficult problem for, I think, the types of people you work with who are involved in high-stakes negotiations, certainly from a lot of my high achiever clients. Two of our biggest strengths as high achievers is that we are, one, really good at compartmentalization. So technically this is suppression. Now, suppression, it sounds like a dirty word. Emotional suppression is actually a really good thing. If you're going to a meeting and you get a text from your teenage daughter saying, "Oh, I had a really bad day at school, Dad. Can we talk?" You can't, what are you going to do? If you go into that meeting and all you're thinking about is how bad a day your daughter had, not only are you not helping your daughter at all, it's not helping her. You're not going to be able to do a good job in the meeting. So you have to be able to compartmentalize and say, you know what, this is important, but I'm going to put it on the back burner and get back to it in an hour when I'm out of my meeting. So the ability to suppress your emotions temporarily is actually a good thing. The trouble is when you're too good at it, when you're really good at it, when you chronically stuff stuff away, it's like putting tons of stuff in a closet, and eventually it's so stuffed that the door bursts open and it just like goes all over the place. So by virtue of being someone who's good at not letting their emotions control them, at sort of compartmentalizing, you can get too good and you can be constantly stuffing stuff without ever addressing it or listening to it. Now, the other problem, the twin problem, is that as soon as anxiety comes up, you attack it. You feel like, I got to get rid of this thing. And the way we attack it usually is we try to solve it. And we this is the other reason high achievers are especially vulnerable to anxiety is another thing we're really good at is problem solving. We use our sort of analytical abilities to try and figure out problems. We're really good at it in all sorts of areas of our lives. The trouble is you can't analyze anxiety away. Thinking more about it will only make it worse. Mm-hmm. So these two things we tend to do, run away or analyze, both end up making anxiety worse because, and this is really key, they teach your brain that anxiety is bad. If your brain sees you constantly either running away from or trying to get rid of something, it's going to assume that thing's a danger, that it's a threat, because it sees you running away from it all the time or trying to get rid of it. So what happens is your brain learns to be afraid of anxiety. This is called compound anxiety. It's when you get anxious about being anxious. Yeah. And for most high achievers, when they say, oh, I get really anxious, the problem is not the initial anxiety. We all get a little bit anxious going into high-stakes situations. The problem is you have trained your brain to be afraid of anxiety because you always either try to avoid it or get rid of it. So you're living in this state where you have constant, chronic, compound anxiety because of these two twin tendencies of I got to escape and get rid of it, or I got to get rid of it and analyze the hell out of it so it goes away. Both of which just make it worse in the long run. So there, and we'll talk about how, but there is a middle way that doesn't involve either of those two things. That is how I think of a healthy relationship with anxiety. But you're shaking your head. Like, does that kind of resonate for some of what you've seen?
It really does, because, one of the things and kind of the way I describe it, I think it's pretty much the same concept, is this notion of being comfortable with what's uncomfortable. And that you have to get to that place to where you have to be comfortable with what is going to cause you anxiety. And in the negotiation process, there's no way to avoid it because there's too much uncertainty in this process. There's too many unknowns that there are going to be things that you don't know how it's going to play out. You don't know how the other side's going to react. You don't know how they're going to respond to your offer, your demand, whatever the case might be. And so as a result of that, you can't avoid not being uncomfortable in this process. And if you are always comfortable in this process, you're not negotiating well. Like, you're losing value like crazy. And so I love that idea. So talk to us then about, okay, how do we deal with it? How do we come to the table, or how do we step into our role as leader, in this case, maybe leader of the negotiation process, where we find a healthy way to embrace our anxiety to where it doesn't get in our way, but it actually fuels us to make good decisions and to be ambitious as well.
Yeah. So I love the term leader there is really important, because you need to lead in the external situation, but that starts with leading yourself and leading these different parts of yourself, like this anxiety that's cropping up. And a good leader doesn't just run away from something difficult or just squash it, right? And this is why I talk about that really working through anxiety in a healthy and productive way means it's not about getting rid of anxiety. It's about changing your relationship with anxiety. As you put it, becoming more comfortable with the discomfort. The way to think about this, the way I like to start thinking about this is there's this author, Liz Gilbert, and she has this, she's written a bunch of books, but she has this creative memoir where she talks about her creative process. And her writing a book, she says her metaphor for this is, it's like she's in a car on a road trip, right? She's got to go thousands of miles across all sorts of terrain to her destination. And so she's driving along, but in the back seat is what she calls the fear monster. And the fear monster, it starts raining a little bit. And the fear monster is like, oh, this is terrible. The book is terrible. Everyone's going to hate it. Like, you should not write the book anymore. And the fear monster is trying to get into the front seat and pull over the car. And what Liz says is there's two traps. One trap is you give over control. You say, okay, fine, you're right. We shouldn't do this. It's a bad idea. I give up, right? This is along the lines of giving up too much, conceding too much, right?
Yeah.
But the other one is, I can't have the fear monster, so I'm going to try and throw him out the window. But the trouble is, you take your hands off the wheel, you try to throw this thing out the window, you're going to crash, and it's going to be even worse.
Distracted.
So exactly. So both things, giving up control or trying to control, both are a disaster because your behavior is based on your emotions, not on what you actually want to or need to accomplish. That's the key thing. You don't want your decisions and your behavior driven by how you feel or how you think you should feel. You need to be able to allow the fear monster to be in the back seat, giving input, and you can say, you know what? I appreciate the input. I know it's coming from a good place, but I got this, right? You're not throwing it out the window. You're not letting it drive. So how do you do that in practice? What does that actually look like? Because people are probably hearing that. They're like, okay, conceptually, maybe I get it. In practice, there's this really simple little 3-part kind of framework or heuristic that I use. I call it the AVA method, AVA.
Okay.
And it's really simple. What it stands for is acknowledge, validate, act. So I'll walk through these real quick. Acknowledge literally just means tell yourself using plain emotion words, how do I feel right now? It's as simple as, okay, I am feeling anxious right now. Not like I'm stressed or I'm so overwhelmed or, oh, this is so hard. No, like what would a 5-year-old say? I'm afraid. I'm afraid right now. I'm anxious. There's a ton of research showing that simply naming or labeling how you feel takes the edge off the intensity. But you have to be like direct and honest about it. Use plain emotional language. What would a 5-year-old say? Is it
helpful to share that with others or just to do it with yourself?
It can be. It depends, but it's always good to do it with yourself. Yeah. So it's more tricky about who and when you kind of share that outside. But this is all kind of to yourself initially. Okay. So acknowledge. It takes 5 seconds. I'm feeling anxious right now. Validate. Like people hear the word validate, they're like, oh God, like mushy therapy speak. No, you're not having a therapy session with yourself. Validate just means remind yourself that whatever you're feeling, however uncomfortable, it's understandable that you're feeling that way. It's like, I don't like feeling so anxious, but you know what? I'm doing something really difficult. The stakes are high. It makes sense that I would feel kind of anxious. And that's the little reframe there is it makes sense. So one way to validate something is to say, I don't like this thing, but it makes sense that I'm feeling this way. It's not surprising, right? And again, this is like opening up like a pressure release valve. So much of the emotional intensity comes down once you validate it, right? And now the third step is the most important because again, the point of this should be really fast. This is not a therapy session. The third step is you give yourself permission to leave the emotion alone. You've acknowledged it, you've validated it, and that took you 7 seconds. So you've said, okay, fear monster, like I see you back there. And now I'm getting back to what actually matters to me. And so I'm going to take action on my values, on what really matters to me right now. This is the key turn where your behavior stops being about your emotion and you focus it back on your goals or what actually matters to you. And you're better able to do that because you have briefly acknowledged and validated the emotion. This is that middle way between either running away or getting in a fight with your anxiety. You've acknowledged and validated it, and then you've redirected your attention and your focus onto what actually matters. And when you get in the habit of doing this, the reason this is so powerful, it will help you feel a little bit better in the moment. But the long-term benefit, the reason I really think of this as an exercise is because it trains your brain to be confident in the face of anxiety instead of anxious about being anxious.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons you feel so anxious and you're so tempted to, make unnecessary concessions just to get out of that anxious feeling is because you've taught your brain to be afraid of being afraid. This process, the AVA method, by briefly acknowledging and validating the anxiety, but then refocusing on what you actually want to do, that teaches your brain, oh, this anxiety thing, like, yeah, it's a little uncomfortable, but it's not a big deal. right? It's okay. It can just stay there. This is how you build up that muscle of what you described as being comfortable being uncomfortable. It's a muscle. It's not just going to happen like that or because you had some clever insight with a therapist or coach. It's a muscle. You got to train it. And this AVA method, acknowledge, validate, act, if you do this repeatedly, you are training yourself to be confident in the face of anxiety instead of being anxious.
Love it. So let's share with folks a couple of stories. I've got a couple of stories that I think are reflective of what you're talking about, but let me give you the first crack. Is there a particular leader, a particular moment, or a particular story that really reflects this and helps people see how it kind of works in someone's mind?
Yeah, sure. So I had a client, we'll call him John. We'll call him John. I was going to say John's my generic name, but your name's John. So we'll call him Robert. How about Robert?
Robert, that's a good generic
So Robert,
name for sure.
Is a big executive, like at a marketing firm, did all of their like partnership work. So he was regularly kind of hobnobbing and having meetings with some pretty impressive, like billionaires, like all-star professional athletes, like really prominent people. And his job was essentially to negotiate deals with them as a part of his work with this marketing firm. The trouble was he would get, nobody knew, no one could tell, but he would get incredibly anxious, almost panicky before these meetings. Anytime he was going into a meeting with someone who he perceived as really high status, he would get really anxious. He'd feel like his heart was beating fast. He'd feel really hot, like he was like sweating a little bit, and so he was regularly taking anti-anxiety meds, Xanax basically, to feel like he had to calm down. The trouble was, in doing this, he would get into these meetings and they would go fine, but they weren't optimal because for him, it was all about, how do I feel less anxious? How do I get out of this as quickly as possible so that I don't have to be anxious anymore? So he was doing a fine job. It wasn't like he was like doing a bad job in these meetings and negotiations and relationships, but it was clearly suboptimal because the main thing driving his behavior was trying to be less anxious. Mm-hmm. So what we had to do, it wasn't about taking more meds or even like learning a bunch of coping skills, deep breathing exercises or something like that. The real work with Robert was getting him to change his relationship to anxiety and to realize that, anxiety is actually normal. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant, but it doesn't mean anything's wrong. And the key little insight for him, and it became like a little mantra for him, was this idea that under the hood, anxiety is just adrenaline. Mm-hmm. So physiologically, if you took two people and you hooked them up to all sorts of sensors, and then you had doctors like looking at the readouts, and one of them, you got them super excited. They're watching their favorite team, and it's like, 2 seconds left, like game's on the line. And then another person, you got them really afraid. Physiologically, it's the same thing that's happening. Mm-hmm. You're getting adrenaline coursing through your veins, and it's leading to, your heart rate's going up, your respiratory rate's going up, whatever. Yeah. So this little mantra is, it's not meant to invalidate the anxiety. It's just meant to remind you that this is a normal process. When you're anxious, your body's doing what it's designed to do. Is your survival really at stake? No, you're not being chased by a bear, right? But there's a challenge. And when your body sees you present with a challenge, it's trying to help you. It releases a little bit of adrenaline, right? Because it thinks you need it to overcome this challenge. Now, whether you do or not, the point is there's nothing wrong. Your body's just trying to help you. So this little like, I'm not anxious. I just got a lot of adrenaline going on. My body's just trying to help me perform. That was like the first step that really helped this client, Robert, change his relationship with anxiety so that it was less something he was afraid of and more something that just, it happened, but it wasn't the main thing driving his behavior. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's
a great story.
But
no, that's a great story. I think of a story that's kind of personal. You used a good business story, so I'll use a personal story.
Yeah.
And this was a moment where my son turned 16 and he got in his first car accident. And so he calls me. He's rear-ended this lady. He hit like the nicest lady in Nashville, Tennessee. Like literally, he got so lucky. Okay. So goes over this hill. A bunch of cars are stopped because the car's turning, and he doesn't have enough time, and he skids into the back of this lady. So they're off to the side of the road. He calls me like, Dad, I just got in an accident. Like I hit this lady. You got to come. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go make sure he's okay. He can get his truck home. But he didn't understand the nature in which I was coming. He thought I was coming to take over and take care of everything.
Yeah.
And I knew in that moment I couldn't do that. I had to go. So I show up, and his truck, thankfully, is drivable. He can get it home. I meet the lady. She's the nicest lady in Nashville, Tennessee. And she's like more worried about him than she is the back of her car. And so then we have this moment where I kind of had to coach Weston through the AVA process that you just described. And so this was a high anxiety moment for him. Yep. He had never talked to the police before. He had never met a stranger like this before. This was a first for him. Yeah. And so he was almost to the point of like not functioning. Like, what do I do? And so you just kind of had to slowly be like, all right, here you go. And so I just asked him, I said, how you feeling right now? He said, he just like hardly could talk. And I was like, all right, listen. I was like, this is kind of a tough moment. Yeah? Yeah, it's a tough moment. And I was like, all right. And I said, but it's an opportunity to kind of grow up because you're going to do a couple of things that you've never done before right now. And he was like, well, I guess. I mean, I don't really want to. And I was like, it doesn't matter what you want right now. Like, you're stuck. Like, you're going to have to deal with this. And yeah, it's super anxious. And then, we kind of get to the point where it's like, hey, Weston, like, you just hit someone. Like, it's a natural reaction to be really nervous about like what's going to happen. And I said, you're about to talk to the police for the first time. That's a nerve-wracking moment. You don't typically talk to law enforcement, but you're going to get through it. And he's like, what do you mean I'm going to get through it? And I was like, you're going to get through it. And he was like, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, here's the deal. I got to go. You're going to have the conversation. And he's like, what do you mean? You can't leave. And I was like, oh, no, I can. And he was like, well, what do I do? And I said, well, like, you got to tell the truth. You got to tell them what happened. And they're going to ask you questions, and you need to be honest and tell them what happened. And so he's like, okay. And so I'll never forget, like, driving away and seeing the look on his face of, like, pure terror, but having gotten to a place to where, like, he could actually do it. Even though he didn't like it, he wasn't comfortable. And then that night, checking in with him, he was like, yeah, I talked to him. Like, it wasn't that hard. Like, da-da-da-da-da. And so there are moments there where I think, in business and in life and in leadership, like, people have these moments where they're thrown into these situations that are really hard and they're really scary. And you've got to learn, like you said, you call it a skill, which I think is great. You got to build that muscle, as you described it, of being able to kind of work through those difficult things. And if you can do that, that almost becomes a superpower because so many people struggle with it.
Absolutely. I love that story. So much of that story. I don't want this to turn into a parenting podcast, but like, I just think that as I have a parent of young kids, I'm sure conversations like that are coming, but I admire that so much, that ability to do the really hard thing as a parent, which is to scaffold your kid just enough, but then to let them struggle because that's what's going to lead to growth and them becoming who they really need to become. Good on you. Like that's so awesome.
Well, I don't know. Maybe there was a few moments that worked out. I've got stories on the other side too.
Sure,
right?
Sure. We all do.
For sure.
But I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into, you have done a little bit of work in terms of kind of breaking things down for people. Like, what is worrying? What is the difference between worrying and stress and talk to people a little bit and help make sense of this kind of whole world of, okay, when am I having anxiety that's unhealthy? When am I just feeling a sense of stress? When am I over-worrying or maybe overanalyzing things? Like, talk people through this kind of mess that our mind can make of things.
I love it. As you're talking, I was thinking, that when you're coming off an airplane and you look in, and the captain or whatever has just come out, and they're talking to the flight attendant. You can kind of see into the cockpit, and I'm not a pilot, but you look and you think, God, there's 400 different buttons and dials, and like, oh my God, this seems so like stressful having to like navigate all those things. And I think that's kind of like when you're anxious. Part of what makes anxiety so hard is it's so overwhelming. Your brain's kind of like frazzled. There's like so many things you could do. And so part of what I try and help people understand is to get clear on what's actually going on when you're anxious. Because there's actually a few big things going on that we tend to lump all together into this term anxiety. And separating them out a little bit is actually a really kind of underrated way to be less anxious in the moment, to differentiate the different things that you're experiencing. So the really big ones are anxiety is an emotion, right? It's how you feel emotionally. It's anxiety and fear are very related. The difference basically is that fear is helpful anxiety. If you're out for a hike and a bear walks in front of you, like you feel afraid and you got to run away, that's good. That's helpful. Anxiety is when you're feeling afraid, but you're not actually in danger, right? Same emotion, but just different situation. So that's the emotion. And what's key to know about emotions is you cannot affect or change your emotions directly. There is no knob or dial. If I say, John, make yourself 20% happier right now, can you do it? No, you could go for a run, or you could, think happy thoughts, or you could do things that then might result in you feeling happier, but there's no knob that you can adjust that will instantly make you happier or instantly make you less anxious, right?
So it's the thermostat, not the thermometer. Is that what you're saying? It's the thermometer, not the thermostat.
Not the thermostat, right? There's no button you can punch to just like, get it up or go down.
Okay.
So that turns out to be really important, right? Now let's keep going, and I'll talk more about why. Another important one is we talked about stress, right? Yeah. Stress is a physical response to challenge or danger. It's how your body reacts to a challenge, right? So it's increased heart rate, it's muscle tension, it's your pupils dilate, it's all that kind of stuff, right? Your respiratory rate goes up. That's different. It's related, but different to the emotion. Often they go together, but they're actually different.
Okay.
A third one is the cognitive side, your thoughts. So, and this is where worry comes in. So worry is you're feeling anxious, right? The emotion. Your muscles are tensed, you're stressed out, you're sweating, right? That's your stress response. But in your head, you're talking to yourself. You're thinking, oh my God, like this is going to go sideways. I'm not prepared enough. What if they do this? I'm screwed. It's all that stuff. You're imagining terrible things happening in the future. You're catastrophizing. It's self-talk. Like, I can't handle this. Like, it's all that kind of stuff. It's the thinking, right? Worry is essentially unhelpful problem solving. You're imagining negative things in the future, but you're not actually solving anything. You're just going in over and over how bad things are going to be. Every little bit of worry generates more anxiety. So this is one of the key problems with anxiety, is that when we get anxious, our natural tendency is to start worrying, which only amplifies the anxiety. So what's key to see is that you can't do a whole lot about the emotion directly. You can't even do a whole lot about how you're feeling physically directly, right? But you can take control of how you're choosing to think, what you're telling yourself in your head. That is something when you think about the control dial of your mind, there's no handle for anxiety or for stress, really, but you can get better at taking control of how you're thinking, right? And the key one is to try your best and practice. This is a skill. Again, it's not something that happens overnight. But you have to notice this tendency to start worrying and put the brakes on that. Because you're just amplifying the anxiety and making it harder to deal with. So this is part of why the AVA method is really helpful, because it's giving your mind something else, something constructive to do, instead of just worrying about how terrible everything's going to go. So it's important to realize, okay, I'm feeling anxious and I'm stressed. Again, like you told your son, like, that sucks. It's a bummer. It's uncomfortable. But there's not much you can do about that right now. What you can control is how you think and your behavior, what you choose to do. So I differentiate these things, because when people feel anxious, they think, oh, I got to stop feeling anxious. That's like what goes through their mind. And then they end up worrying. But the key is to be able to tell yourself, this is a bummer, but there's not much I can do about the fact that, like my heart's racing, or that I feel really anxious. What can I do? I can think about my behavior and what I'm doing with my mind.
Yeah.
And taking responsibility for the things you actually can control and letting go of responsibility for the things you cannot control is at the heart of kind of healthy anxiety management. But to do that, you have to be able to differentiate these things. So that's why I think those distinctions are really, really important.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I love the idea of like the one that we can control at some levels, the worrying. And yeah. I read a study recently, you may be familiar with what I was looking at. It was a study of people who worried, and researchers went in and said, okay, like, what is the worst thing that can happen about what you're worrying about? And what they found, and I won't get the numbers exactly right, but what they found was that it was only like 20% of the people in terms of what they worried about actually experienced what they were worrying about. Mm. And then out of those 20%, it was like another 80%, it was nowhere near as bad as what they thought it would be when they actually experienced it.
Yeah.
And then there was another percentage of those 80% that actually had the worst case that their mind led them to actually come to fruition. And so
Gotcha.
When you circled all that back, what they said was your mind will take you from here to the worst case scenario in a real hurry, without any logistical stops or rational stops in between. And so you get locked into, oh my goodness, I have a headache. That must mean I have this disease. And it's like, no. It means you need 2 Tylenol and, you're good.
Right.
And so what was interesting about that was to realize that like the things we worry about, frankly, there's like a 1% to 2% chance that those things will actually ever kind of happen. And you can kind of trick your mind back rationally to say, okay, that could happen, but it's not very likely to happen. And it helps with some of that. The other thing that I've kind of learned to do and to coach people around me when we're going into big negotiations where there's a lot of this going on is to say, hey, look, like, yes, there's a lot of bad things that could happen. This deal could go south. We don't get a deal. We don't get the case resolved, whatever the case might be. But what if we pivoted that to where instead of our minds thinking about all of the dangers that could happen, like what if we just walk in and say, we're just looking for an opportunity here. And that's what our focus is to try to find the opportunity. And if we can trick our mind into exploring the opportunity instead of just being stuck in all these dangers, I find people become much more productive and they make much better decisions as we're negotiating to try to make things happen.
I love it. And let me add something to kind of support that. So one of the things with worry that's true, and you sort of talked about, you said like our mind can take us to these like awful worst case scenario. The key with worry is to realize this funny thing about the mind and our thoughts, which is that, and the way I talk about this is a worry is different than worrying. And what I mean by that is that your mind can throw a worry at you. Yeah. You didn't choose to have this happen at all, but you're driving down the street and you think, oh my God, like what if my kid got in a car accident today on the way home from work? And then you feel a little bit anxious. You didn't choose to have the thought. Your brain just threw it at you for whatever reason. That's a worry. And there's nothing you can do about that. You can't control. It's like dreams. You can't decide whether you have good dreams or nightmares. Your brain just does it. Yeah. But worrying is where you have that thought about your kid getting in a car accident. And then you think, oh my God, what if he was in a car accident? What happened? Maybe he's at the hospital. What if he had some really serious injury? What if he ... all the way down to the worst. The key is you have control over the worrying. You didn't control that initial thought, but you actually decided to continue the story. Your brain started the story, right? So you were the character and the narrator told you what was happening, but you are also the author and you kept the story going. Now I say that because it's really important to take responsibility for the fact that we write our own story.
Yeah.
And whether the story you're writing is this horrible, awful, the end of the world, kind of what-ifing, catastrophizing story, or whether it's, yes, some bad things are possible, but there's a ton of opportunity here, and here's what all those opportunities look like. Fundamentally, that is under your control. It's not always easy. Our instinct is often to go to the negative, but it is something you can do, and it's something with practice you can get better at. That is like really fundamental. It's hard, but taking responsibility and ownership for like narrating your own life, telling the story of your own life, like you are the author. It's so important to really own that. Otherwise, you're at the mercy of worries, right? So go ahead.
So we got to change the song, right? The song is "Don't worry, be happy." Really, it needs to be "Stop worrying, be happy."
Bingo.
The worry is going to happen, is what you're saying. Is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
But you don't have to keep worrying. You can change the narrative. And actually, I want to share like it's probably my favorite exercise in all of psychology, specifically geared toward worry. And how do you kind of reprogram your brain away from worrying towards a more helpful line of thinking?
Good.
And it's called scheduled worry. It's really counterintuitive, but that's part of what makes it fun. Scheduled worry is the idea that you take a little bit of time every single day, 5 minutes, could be as short as 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and you deliberately worry on purpose. So you get out a legal pad, you get a scratch paper and a pen, you set a timer on your phone for 10 minutes, and you just worry dump everything you can think about that you're worried about. Everything from, your kid got a bad grade in algebra class to you've got a huge negotiation coming up tomorrow to, politics, whatever. Everything you can think about, just write it out. You're just, and here's the thing, you're not solving them. You're literally just transcribing them out onto paper.
Okay.
And you do that for, once the alarm goes off, you stop. You take the paper, you crumple it up, you throw it away. You do not analyze the worries. What you're doing is you're giving your brain space to worry on purpose. And you are doing it deliberately. You're not falling into worrying. You are choosing to worry at this very specific time. What happens is if you get in the habit of doing this, you become much better in the moment at saying, oh, you know what? I can feel my brain going down this worry path. I don't want to do that. I've got a time for this. It's my scheduled worry time. I do it at 7:45 every night after I put the kids to bed. I sit down for 10 minutes before I watch TV and I just like throw all my worries out. Brain, thank you for your concern. I'll get to it in my scheduled worry time. I'm going to refocus on the opportunity or what I need to do. This habit, when my clients actually do this, I'd say 70% of them never do it, or they do it once or twice and they don't stick with it. The people who follow through on this, I have never, in hundreds of times doing this with people, I have never not seen it lead to a considerable reduction in worry and anxiety.
Wow.
In any area of life. So you can do it as a regular practice, but it's also just helpful if you have a particularly say you got a big case or something coming up for a few weeks. Do this for 2 or 3 weeks leading up to it to train your mind that you can worry intentionally and then you cannot worry when it's not helpful. So it's a weird practice, but it's so helpful. It's like the single most helpful thing I've found for dealing with worry and anxiety on a regular basis.
Okay, I gotta put that to work because this may be too much information for people, but my scheduled worry, and this is not intentional scheduling, it's just when I worry, is whatever that period of time is between the time I turn the TV off, put the phone away, lay my head down on the pillow, and the time I go to sleep. Like that's a moment of worry. For whatever reason, like bad thoughts come into my mind about just all the things that are going on in life and what's coming the next day and all that kind of thing. And I'm hoping this can help me with that moment.
So I wasn't going to bring it up, but since you did, it's like when I deal with clients who have insomnia or sleep problems, this is the first thing I have them start doing.
Okay, good.
Because this is another one of these like high achiever vulnerabilities. We are so good throughout the day at like getting stuff done. Something comes up. We don't have time for worries during the day. Yeah. We're just boom, 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 going through stuff, right? And our mind is constantly like, hey, what about this? What about that? And we're like, nope, focused, getting stuff done. Right?
Yeah.
So then the only time throughout the day when you finally have like space and you're not occupied with something else, of course your mind is going to jump at the opportunity. Here's the 45 things you wouldn't let me think about earlier in the day that I'm like stressed and worried about. And it's going to dump all of them at you at the exact wrong time when you're in bed trying to fall asleep. So you can head off so much of this if you just give your brain a little bit of time sometime earlier. Again, do it early in the evening or do it at your lunch break or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you consistently get in the habit of giving your brain time to get those worries acknowledged and out into real life, they will, A, you'll have less of them at night, way less of them, but also B, you'll have a much easier time kind of letting them go and just like allowing yourself to fall into sleep. So it's super helpful with sleep and insomnia too.
And that's practical and easy for people to do. So
totally.
There's no reason why you can't take 5-10 minutes and just write down what you're worried about. So let's wrap this up by talking about kind of the ultimate solution. So we've done a lot of diagnostic here, and I've resonated with a lot of it. I'm sure other people will. But as we think about how to, I don't know if manage is the right word, but as we think about how to create a healthy sense of self in light of the fact that we are going to have worries, anxiety, stressors, all those things, like, well, what's the ultimate solution that you recommend to leaders and to people out there?
So the word that captures it to me is assertiveness. Now, assertiveness, it's got this weird connotation from like the 80s when like power posing and stuff like that was like a big like fad. And people think of assertiveness and they think like kind of bullying, like rude. I'm just going to tell people like whatever, and that's not what assertiveness is. A very technical thing in psychology. And it's got kind of two meanings. There's the narrow meaning, which is assertive communication. And we'll talk about what that is in a second. But the bigger kind of umbrella is living your life assertively means that your behaviors are motivated by your values. You are choosing to do what matters most to you, not how you happen to feel or happen to want to feel, or not what's going to get you out of being uncomfortable. It's exactly what you were teaching your son in that accident scenario. You were teaching him, look, you've got all sorts of feelings pulling you in all sorts of ways, right? Including to just like drift off and let me handle negotiating with this board, the nicest woman in Nashville, right?
Yeah.
But what you trained your son to do was like, look, there is a right thing to do here. And like, despite how you feel, it's important to be able to do what's important to you, what's meaningful, regardless of what's going on and how you happen to feel, whatever emotions are important. That's living assertively. And ultimately, that's the real solution to chronic or excessive anxiety. Is whatever you're feeling, by living according to your values, what actually matters in the moment, the right thing, you are teaching your brain that like anxiety has its place, but it's not in charge. And that's what's going to help you have a healthy relationship with anxiety. Instead of getting in squabbles with your anxiety or basing all your behavior on how do you feel less anxious, you're sort of acknowledging it, right? But you're directing your behavior at the things that actually matter to you, not how you happen to feel in the moment. Now, one of the most important ways to live assertively is to communicate assertively. And assertive communication, again, it has all sorts of connotations, but the true definition is it's communicating in a way that is respectful to yourself and other people. So imagine like a 2x2, a little graph with an x-axis and a y-axis, right? The dimension, the x-axis, the horizontal dimension, is respect for self. It can be low or high, right? When you're respectful or honest to your own wants and needs, you're willing to communicate really clearly about this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this is how I actually feel, right? When you don't respect yourself, you're not willing to be clear. You're like, oh, well, maybe they're going to feel bad, so I won't say anything. I won't tell people what I really think. Or like, oh, it's going to be awkward, so I won't say no to that request. You're disrespecting yourself, right, when you're doing that. Now, so that's one dimension, but there's also how respectful are you to other people? A lot of us, especially as kind of conflict avoiders, we're super respectful of other people, right? So we're really deferential to the point where we're disrespectful to ourselves. We say like, oh yeah, sure, I'll do it. Even though we're like, no, I can't do this. I've already got way too much on my plate, but I don't want them to be unhappy, right? So I'll do it anyway. The ideal assertive communication means you're in that upper right-hand quadrant where you are being perfectly respectful and honest about what you want. You're being clear about, this is what I want, this is what I need, this is what I don't want, this is how I actually feel. And you're doing it in a way that is perfectly respectful of the other person. You're not being a bully, you're not being passive aggressive, you're being completely respectful of both. And the key thing here that I think a lot of us fall into is we don't realize that that is possible. We don't actually believe that that's possible. We think if I want my needs to get met, someone's going to be unhappy, right? Or, right, if I'm going to get my needs met, it means I'm going to be kind of like a bully and be sort of like aggressive. But no, you can do both. You can actually have your cake and eat it too. You can be completely honest and transparent about what you want and completely respectful of the other person. That's assertive. That's communicating assertively. And it's key to like this broader idea of living assertively and not living with so much anxiety. So much of the time when people have chronic anxiety, it's because in some way, in some part of their life, they're not willing to be assertive. They have some sort of want or need that they need to communicate with someone important to them. It could be their spouse, it could be their boss, it could be their kid, it could be whoever. And they're afraid on some level. And so they're not communicating assertively, transparently, honestly about what they actually need. So I know I opened up a whole can of worms here with this assertiveness thing, but like I really believe that's the answer to anxiety big picture, is being willing to live assertively.
And I love that because from a negotiation standpoint, you're right. People often, they mistake assertiveness for their style of communication. When assertiveness, as you've described it, actually comes from within, and it becomes very, very formidable in the negotiation process. Because what it does is it takes away the ability of the other side to use a tactic to try to just rattle you and to exploit you or to use some sort of fear-driven kind of tactic to cause you to make a bad decision. If they sense that you are assertive, as you described it, in terms of this coming from within, our values coming through, and being confident in those and having those be the drivers of how we're going to solve this problem or put this deal together, and they know that there's not going to be an opportunity to rattle you, then what will happen is they will change their approach in terms of how they try to put the deal together. And instead of trying to take advantage of whatever uncertainties, anxieties, fears that you might have, they will then respect you, and you use that word, to the point that they will then become more problem solving in how to work with you in order to get a deal that is good for everyone. And so that assertiveness, while a really, really important human dynamic, as you've described, it is also a absolutely critical negotiation strategy. And one of the things that people will have to understand is that it will get challenged. It will get challenged because what will happen is people will test it by trying to ramp up the tactics and the fear and those kinds of things, as some negotiators like to do, especially in an adversarial context like litigation. But if you're willing to kind of just be comfortable in your own skin in terms of how it is that you're playing out the process, eventually they'll change their approach. And the moment that happens, things become much more productive.
I like that. And it really, in a way, it brings us kind of full circle, because I think to do that, what's required is you have to be okay with yourself feeling anxious or angry or whatever it is. And you have to be okay with other people feeling upset or angry. Like, it's not pleasant when other people are angry or upset or whatever, but it's okay. Other people are allowed to be angry. They're allowed to be anxious. They're allowed to be sad. They're allowed to be whatever the hell they want. Their behavior is a different story, but their emotions, they can be whatever they want, right? And you can feel whatever you want. It's uncomfortable, but it's not bad. It's not a sign that I need to change something, or I can't ask for all of this because they might get upset, or like, so it's all this whole assertiveness thing is predicated on this healthier relationship with difficult emotion, and especially fear, which is that it's uncomfortable, but it's not bad. It's not dangerous, right? And when you really believe that, your capacity to be assertive, to communicate assertively, and to get to those optimal problem solving, that's it. That's the whole thing.
Yeah. And what you described right there is, a big thing that we've hammered in this podcast, and it's part of my book, is the whole idea of empathy and of recognizing, like, oftentimes what happens is I say, it's intellectually lazy if you come back to me and you say, we didn't get a deal because the other side's crazy.
Totally.
That's intellectually lazy. Like, it's your job to figure out what's causing the other side to behave the way that they're doing, or taking the positions that they're taking. And in your context, from where you sit in your emotional state and your analytical view of it all, that may be crazy. But if you put themselves in their shoes, it's not crazy at all. It actually makes a lot of sense that they feel that way, or they've taken this position. And once you understand that and you begin thinking about how to problem solve, with that, around that, through that, then you're going to be in a much better place in order to capture value, win the deal, whatever the case might be. But the folks that just come back and say, we can't work with this person because they're crazy, that's intellectually lazy. And I think you've given us some real tools in terms of kind of how to work through that. So, Nick, tell us, where can people find you? Where can people find your work? Give us a sense of how folks can connect with you.
Sure. So if you like some of the stuff I was talking about, this scheduled worry idea in particular, I have a little guide on that. So you can check that out if you want. It walks you through, like, here's the steps, here's the instructions, or whatever. Let's go scheduledworry.com. Just go to scheduledworry.com. You can download this little guide. But the bigger thing is I have a newsletter. I write, essays and articles and do podcasts on a regular basis, most of which are around kind of emotion management. How do you deal with difficult emotions in a healthy and productive way so that you can get on with the stuff that's actually important to you in your life? And you can just go to my website, nickwignall.com, or nicksnewsletter.com. Both will get you to the newsletter. And yeah, I'd love to have you on. And John, I really appreciate the time to chat. It was a just awesome, fascinating conversation.
Good deal. Well, lots of fun. We'll definitely have to do this again, and really appreciate your insights. They're so applicable to not only those of us that negotiate for a living, but for everyone who is leading and working with people. I think what you shared with us today moves us forward in significant ways. And I'm going to go home tonight and get my worry list out and have my scheduled worry time. And hopefully I'll sleep a little better.
There you go.
Well, this episode is chock full of some incredible tools. Ava is something that I'm going to put to work immediately. I love the idea of the fear monster in the backseat of the car and what we do with that. I so resonate with that because I can tell you and I can describe the fear monsters that I've had go with me as I'm negotiating. I can also talk to you about those moments where I did not use the AVA process very well. And as a result of that, I let my emotions maybe get ahead. And so these tools, I think, are really, really valuable to each of us as we're negotiating to make sure that our emotions are managed well so that they don't get in the way of us making really good strategic decisions as we seek to manage the negotiation process in a way that will lead us to our next level of success. Dr. Nick Wignall provided us with some incredible tools. I hope you will go put them to work as I intend to do, and as a result of that, you will be more successful, not only in your negotiations, but you will be more successful in how we manage ourselves, making us better leaders, better negotiators, and better people. Thanks for listening to the Negotiation Made Simple podcast, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.